Matt, it's great to sit down with you. I'd love to just get started with you sharing a little bit about your background.
I'm with Koch Industries. I'm actually part of the Koch Global Services group. I've recently started to transition into the Chief Technology Officer role there. So I've been at Koch for a little over 20 years. Over the past 5 years, I've been with the enterprise architecture team, and really starting with a mandate of how do we really digitally advance the business. The Invista acquisition doubled our footprint from an employee base and from a location base. 2005, we acquired Georgia Pacific, which doubled us again. And we recently finalized our acquisition of Infor. We have a Koch Disruptive Technologies that they invest in a lot of things that are going to be disruptive to the world from a technology base.
What do you see as maybe the biggest opportunity and also the biggest challenge?
There's a lot of opportunities around, whether that be acquisition or additional growth or whatever. And part of that is moving faster. I think one of the key things for us is how do we move forward at the speed of business, not at the speed of traditional IT.
How do you think about sort of the assets of the enterprise and what's important to be connecting and protecting?
In most of our business units, we've done a really good job of implementing that the Purdue model and really thinking about how do we really segment those physical assets and the control of those physical assets. But as we move into this future of more and more automation of manufacturing, and then machine learning, AI, big data analytics, all of those things have some ties to the cloud. And as you think about the historical Purdue model, I think the model itself fundamentally is probably not a bad mental model. Physically, how it's been implemented for decades doesn't scale, and we're really starting to see, that's becoming more and more Swiss cheese, which is really scary for our OT guys, and even down into the edge, right? So when we talk about cloud, we talk about that more of how things work, not necessarily where they work. And then so when you think about edge technologies, whether that be the edge of our network, the edge of the cloud, the edge of a carrier network, whatever that is, those things are really straining that historical security model.
The idea of Swiss cheese, I think, is perfect, right? I've got to now go poke a bunch of holes in what was a very regimented, very sort of physically segmented network, and I think we definitely need to rethink the way we implement those controls, and so you've kind of been dealing with these different stakeholders, over the course of your career. And just the way that the networks are architected, it's so that we don't have single points of failure, we don't have single paths, et cetera. And then the security team comes in and says, well, wait a minute, we have to secure this. So we need to put controls in place, and all of the work that was done to build this highly available, highly resilient, high-performing fabric. How do you see that evolving, and kind of how is Koch thinking about this? How are you thinking about that in terms of increasing the security posture, but leveraging a lot of that availability and performance that the network teams have been focused on?
Historically, we've really looked at security as almost an afterthought, right? A bolt-on. That doesn't help from an end user satisfaction perspective. So over the past several years, I think we've done a pretty good job of starting to line those groups up to really think about it as more of a holistic solution, right? So it's not a network solution with a security solution, it's a network security solution. So security has priorities, network has priorities, and the business has priorities. And when we don't get those priorities mixed well, that's where we get unsatisfied stakeholders, but also we get timelines out of sync and potentially security problems as well. Timelines are shrinking, and there's more pressure to move faster. There's more pressure for more connectivity. So in our business network, we've really started to decentralize things, right? So we're not necessarily always tied to the data center. And while the OT space is trailing that, I think it's moving very quickly towards that direction as well.
In a lot of cases, these traffic patterns are changing to the point where I don't even come anywhere close to it. So I've got to be able to take the policy that was implemented in that control and figure out a way to get it back out to kind of the edge of that asset wherever it lives. There's been lots of discussion around this concept of zero trust. But would just love your kind of perspective of, what does zero trust mean?
So we think about zero trust as kind of a North Star, right? So every decision you make should take you in that direction, but it's not something you're going to get to tomorrow. Our first thought is, how do we get our users off of our network? We've proven that it's possible. We've got 90+% of our workforce that at some point has worked from home, and we've been largely successful there. Having 90% of your people working from home, not on your network, is absolutely a concern. So hopefully we're good and lucky at the same time.
How are you guys leveraging things like infrastructure as code and other, other evolutions to make it, self-serve almost for the development community?
A lot of it was lift and shift, and I think we learned a lot of valuable but painful lessons there. So whether that be a compute construct, an application construct, or even a security construct, some of those things just don't work well in the cloud. In a nutshell, I would say it's a lot of education. But it's also working with partners, external partners, and various different companies that help get us to that. We use the mental model of Legos, right? As long as everything goes together similarly, like APIs, right? Then putting these things together in bits and pieces is much easier than the heavy integrations that we've had in the past, or potentially placing firewalls at every location. Those are really hard to do. I need security policies, I need integration capabilities that can exist anywhere. I think the technology is the easy part, not that it's easy, but building that into the people and processes is really a challenge.
Is there anything you can share just in terms of sort of bridging that brownfield to greenfield gap?
You kind of have to weigh the backwards compatibility with the forward thinking, right? So we want to push as far forward as possible. We partner with those that are ready and willing, and I suppose you could say more forward leaning. So some of our businesses that are really driving a lot more of that AI, ML, big data, I think we partner with them to really, what's next?
How have you seen the hardcore, OT really respond to, again, a very much a software-based view of the world?
There's really been a push to, how do we not have so much segmentation? How do we better communicate and things like that? Then it becomes, well, hold on, if segmentation is easier, maybe we should be more segmented, not less. And the challenge now is, how do we maintain that segmentation but still keep that overall collaboration and communication?
Yeah, you move the choke point from being a kind of network layer construct to where it probably really should be, which is driven directly at the business value layer.
The network itself has zero value unless you do something with it. Our value isn't necessarily in running networks. When you look at some of the things that are coming, like broader LTE and 5G coverage, things like network as a service, then the thought process is even deeper into, it has to be software for me to protect a network that's not mine, or even people working from home, right?
Right.
First and foremost, I'm not really a network guy, right? So I understand it, but I've never logged into a router kind of thing, right? Those things low in the stack need to truly be easy, because to your point, right, we need to be able to have policies that fit business outcomes, not policies that fit network experts or security experts' mental models, right? It also has to be something that is broadly deployable, right? So something that can reach anywhere in our network, but it also needs to be flexible enough, knowing that you'll never get to one global policy for the entire organization. That's unrealistic. And when you get to the point where you realize your network really has no perimeter, then you have to be able to trust the users and the devices that are accessing your applications and data, stitching that all together with applications to where you have this consistent flow of trusted application, trusted data, trusted user, trusted device. That's nirvana, right? That's where we get to, I'm much more comfortable that I'm as secure as I'm going to get.
We talked a little bit about the need for connectivity into the cloud edge from some of these physical environments. What are some of the other things that you guys see as, again, it's not a getting to a zero trust overnight. We may never get there fully, but if we can start to incrementally unlock some of this value, how do you see this evolving the business value side of the conversation for Koch?
There's no definition of where business and technology end anymore, right? It's all one thing moving forward. It's just in and around everything that you do. The key area there is in that OT space. Certainly as we have more and more cloud computing, I think it has to evolve there as well. We have challenges kind of everywhere, so it's really understanding what those big priorities are and addressing them appropriately. A lot of times, especially when it's some of these difficult concepts like zero trust networking, where you get the thought leadership isn't necessarily in the historical leaders, right? So it's some of those startups, and it's challenging to convince leadership that we need to bet some portion of our business on a startup. But we've done it multiple times, and what we found is it's not just the technology, right? It's the vision of the future, and it's the company's ability to execute. So when we buy a product or invest in a company, it's really based not just on the technology, but the people behind it as well, and the vision that they have and their ability to execute.
How have you been able to successfully drive some of these things, and make it more of a pool, especially when you think about bringing, teams that traditionally haven't necessarily seen eye to eye, bringing them together?
So really from the business perspective, right? So we've talked about we're several different businesses, not just one large enterprise. We've built a lot of good, we call them our various councils, right? So we've got a CTO council. Each business has their own chief technology officer, right? Most of our businesses are large enough to warrant that. A lot of them have their own OT leaders, and they have their own council. And so what we do is we get together and we talk about what are these challenges, and then we can start to have better conversations with the broader businesses on, hey, we know how to get into this space, and I think that we're starting to build that trust, and that's the real thing, right? Is continuously building that trust where business units trust business units, OT trusts IT, and we can start to move these things together in bits and pieces. It can't be the whole enterprise at once.
So Matt, Koch has relationships with every IT manufacturer, every IT supplier, and you've been very successful, partnering with emerging disruptive startups to really drive the change that you're looking for. Can you just share a little bit about why do you think that is, and what has made you so successful in being able to deliver on those partnerships?
So when you look at some of the larger vendors out there, I think they have the same similar challenge that we have in changing our environment, right? Is they have a certain set of products and capabilities that were designed for an era, and changing that is a real challenge, right? Just turning that ship takes a long time. If you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. And how do we move us forward faster is to partner with some of those thought leaders that are previously we would have called them born digital, right? And now maybe it's born in the cloud or born zero trust networking, right? Where that's the goal. Their entire mission is helping businesses get from that legacy state to the future state. And I think that helps us with our ability to move forward faster. It helps us challenge our thinking as well, because I think a lot of times we do feel like that we're this big aircraft carrier that can't turn, and really we need to think about ourselves as a whole bunch of speedboats, right? And we move as a flock, not necessarily as a monolith. And that's where the small startups that are focused on that innovation can really help us get there faster.
Excellent. I think that there's a misnomer that sort of the bigger your organization is, the more the more sort of inertia there is, and so by definition you end up sort of much later on that adoption curve. But you guys have really broken that model. Why, and how have you been successful with it?
What I would say is it's not necessarily something that can be driven by the IT organization. It has to be a partnership of IT and the business. And we've got key business leaders that really want to drive forward, understanding that technology is eating the world, and that even in some of the very legacy businesses that we have, technology can advance and drive that forward faster to where technology is literally baked into the products. And when you start to get that push from the business, it's not an option whether IT moves or not, right? It's either I can do it or my successor can do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. As you think about the concept of least privilege, what does that look like in the reality of the Koch network?
We talked a little bit about how do you get more granular over time. When we started down the software-defined perimeter path, it was very broad ranges of rule sets, right? If you shouldn't have access to something, you shouldn't even be able to reach it on the network. And that gives us better control over, again, what things can touch. Ultimately, it's really what can touch the data, right? Because that's where the ultimate goal is, the data. So data and applications just becoming tighter and tighter as you can. And that's an evolution. That's, again, something that I think we'll be working on for a while. Part of that is the capability of the tools today, and as those improve, and as those get, again, easier to work with and more broadly applicable, I think we'll be able to continue to shrink that, those into more granular policies.
Would love to get your perspective on, not a Koch problem, but really, I think a challenge, an existential challenge, where we recognize that there have been attackers with access to systems and networks for months. There's the question of, can we really ever go and remediate those environments? Or does this actually accelerate some greenfield build out because we kind of have to cap and grow?
I think the simple answer is there's definitely a desire. It drives a desire to do some of that more greenfield. Starting a greenfield from an ERP perspective is not a small task. So I think we're going to have to think a little bit differently about what the impacts to those are. If these attackers allegedly have been in for a long time, what's the next one that they don't know they're in yet, right? And I think that goes back to, you're never going to be 100% secure. It becomes more and more important from, understanding who your partners are, understanding who your counterparties are. I think it really does all come back to that zero trust concept, that least privilege concept of, let's continue to shrink that blast radius. Because if I can't control those third-party things, and I can't, and I never will, then I need to be able to, at the very least, shrink what that can impact. That all sounds great. If you know how we get there, I'd love to hear it.
This is going to have to be done in software because the lift from a physical infrastructure perspective to go try and do that is just it's too much.
It is, and I think there'll always be a place for hardware, but at the end of the day, it's too slow, it's too expensive, and it's inflexible. And that's where the world has to be defined by software going forward.
100% agree. If you kind of, fast forward 5 years, how do you see, kind of where do you think we'll be from a software-defined perimeter, zero trust, kind of identity-based view of the world integrated with these cloud technologies?
Well, I'll tell you where I hope we'll be. I don't know if that's where I think we'll be or not. Hopefully with some of these partnerships we can get there, right, is that I don't have to own the network. I can have better, policy sets can better represent business risk and business outcomes, and those can be applied wherever in the world we are, whether that be geographically distributed or from the cloud to the edge to the data center to the home user, whatever that is, right? If we can get to that outcome where we can deploy and ensure policy across all of those, and the policy really resonates with the business risk and the business outcomes, I think that's where we want to be. And again, it lets us continue to move up that value stream, right? Where we don't have to own the network to be successful. Proved that through the pandemic. We don't have to own the data center. We're moving more and more stuff to the cloud. And even at the edge, right? When you start to see edge computing through 5G and the carriers and AWS Outpost and things like that, doesn't even have to be our edge. And that lets us focus on our business, right? Secure the business, run the business. So.
Very good. Well, Matt, I really appreciate taking the time to sit down. It's been a great conversation as always. Thank you.
Thank you.